So today I'm going to be talking about continuous deployment, also continuous integration. Very similar ideas, and they're great. Um, so to get started, what is continuous integration and deployment? Basically, they both work together to automate processes that you do every day to help make your job easier and help you do a better job with it. So continuous integration is the process of testing things as you write them, as you commit them, and then if they pass those tests, they get integrated into the project or the product. Continuous deployment is the step beyond that, where we say, hey, this code looks good, it's been tested, let's get it into the hands of the people who need it, whether that's testers, App Store users, whoever it may be, your mom, I don't know. But and we want to be able to accomplish these things with as little effort as possible, doing as few things as we can by hand and letting the automation take care of most of the work. So it does take a fair amount of time to invest in building continuous deployment and integration. So we should talk about why it's valuable and why you should invest in it. There are three, I think, main points of why it's good. Consistency. Basically, you get to define your process and say, hey, this is how we should do testing, or hey, this is how we should do builds. And then you get to formalize that process in the form of scripts and various things that help you carry out that process the same way every time. Quality is another benefit, so you're testing more often, you're catching bugs before they leave your desk and go out to a tester. And also speed of delivery. So new code is delivered as soon as it's working, not whenever you think it's working and now I'm going to make a build and I have to do all these 10 steps to make it get to that person who's going to test it. So really just cutting out all that wasted time of repeatable steps where you're making the build, sending it, doing all this stuff, just to save time. And the quote here from David Farley, who wrote a book on continuous delivery. And basically he thinks that making you do repeatable tasks is the most certain way of ensuring human error, short of sleep deprivation or inebriation. And you're probably already sleep deprived, you might be inebriated, so let's cut out those other human errors and cut them to a minimum. So let's talk about consistency. So first of all, does anyone here have a continuous integration deployment system that they're using on a regular basis? We got one. We got Jennifer. Yes, you do. That's right. Okay, that's good. No, that's good. So we're all going to be learning something. So consistency. We want to make builds turn out the same every time, regardless of who made them, where they came from, when they were made. There may be certain things you want to enforce on every build, like, hey, we're always going to increment the build number so that people can tell, this code is different from this code, and this code is the same as this code because it has the same build number. Always make sure that you provisioned it correctly for whoever it's going to, make sure that they're going to be able to install it. And, other things like maybe you want to always tag your commit with that build number and say, hey, we sent this build out from this commit, so if anyone has problems with the build, we can come back to this commit and say, hey, this is exactly the state we were in for that build, and we can figure out problems from there. Other good things that you want to do consistently is notify people. So as soon as that build is ready, you're going to notify whoever should pick it up from there, your testers, your whoever. And also, say the build doesn't work out, tests fail, if the build fails for whatever reason, you want to notify the responsible developer as soon as you can so that they can tackle the issue. And then you want everyone's builds to turn out the same. It doesn't matter if they're a new developer, they've been there for 10 years. You want them to all do the same process. And it's really hard to do that without continuous deployment. You have to ultimately educate everybody and say, hey, this is how we do it here. You're going to follow these steps every time, I hope. And then you have to document everything so that everyone can remember it, and I hope they read the documentation. So it's really just a great way to enforce those policies as opposed to having to make everyone responsible for it. So the second benefit was quality. So obviously we want to catch bugs before they go out. We don't want to waste people's time, people who are paid money to be doing this. We would rather computers do it because they don't have to pay them. Yeah, so we're saving testers time, we're saving our own time. And if you have automated tests, they don't do anything for you if you're not running them like all the time. Like you may have tests, but if your developer forgets to run the test before he sends the build, they may as well not be there. You may as well have not written tests. So we want to run the tests as often as we can, anytime there's new code, right away, so we catch things early. And you can also enforce a certain level of code coverage with your CI. So you can say, run the tests, look at the coverage. If it falls below 80%, we're going to fail this build and say you can't send out this build until you write more tests. So that's a way of enforcing your testing policy on developers and saying, hey, we're going to make a collective effort to keep this well tested. And the last thing, speed of delivery. We want to get builds to people as soon as we can. We should be able to do that, just by committing and pushing our code, or just by clicking a button, to send it to the store. Our job is only really done when those features make it into the hands of the people that want the features. You may complete your code and be like, man, I really nailed that feature, and then 45 minutes later they get the build. You're not done working until it's passed on to the next person. So we want to make that happen as quickly as possible. So let's talk about implementation. How do we actually make this stuff happen? It's basically broken out into two parts. You've got your build scripts, which basically just lay out, this is how we're going to build. We're going to use these tools, and we're going to do them in this order. And here's a script. We can run this anywhere, make builds. And the second part is a build server, which is basically your scripts live on that server. The server gets notified when there's new code, and the build server runs the scripts, caches the results like your IPA, your test coverage reports, all that kind of stuff, collects all the artifacts, publishes them, makes them available to other people. So those are the two main parts. We're going to dive into some more specifics here. So there's a number of command line tools you can use for building iOS projects. Xcode build is kind of the de facto. That's what Xcode uses by the name, you can tell. It can do a lot of stuff, but it's kind of a little bit harder to use. The output is not very helpful. It's very verbose. It spits out like every command that the compiler is doing. Luckily, there's other things like this thing called XCPretty, where you can actually pipe the output to that, and it'll format it nicely and make it look a little more readable and just give you the stuff that matters. Like, hey, here are the warnings. Here are the errors. Whereas Xcode build's like, hey, we compiled this file. We compiled this file. I don't care. Unless it has problems, I don't care. XCTool is a very similar tool. That was built by Facebook. A little bit easier to use, better output. Has JSON, like different reporters you can use to give you output if you want to feed that into something else. Another thing that's different about it is you can actually run your unit tests in parallel with each other. So that could actually cut down on the testing time for every build by a significant amount. If you're Facebook, that probably makes a big difference. May not make a big difference to you. Shenzhen is a tool built by our good friend Matt Thompson. It basically does the building and will distribute it to various services like TestFlight, Crashlytics. Even if you just want to dump it on S3, it can do all of that. So that's a great tool. And then so you're going to use this, these tools along with some other tools to make your whole script happen. And there's a few different ways you can piece them together. You can write straight up shell scripts, which is not very fun. You can definitely piece all the commands together with Bash, but as soon as you need to start doing like data manipulation or like hey, we need to parse this JSON response. If you're doing a curl post, it's not super easy to pipe that into something and get logic to, to work with that data and manipulate it, figure out what, where to go from there. So it's not the best. You can't do everything. A slight improvement over using Bash is using make files, which are essentially you define little tasks. Like maybe you define a task called test, and that runs Xcode build test. And then you can define a task called beta, and you can piece together your other tasks into bigger tasks. So that's kind of cool because it lets you reuse code between different jobs. With Bash scripts alone, it's kind of hard to do that, or it just gets kind of messy. But there's one really good solution out there, better than Bash, better than make, and it's called Fastlane, and it's great. And so that's pretty much what I'm going to be showing you for the rest of the presentation is how to set up CI and CD with Fastlane, how great it is, how much better it is than using Bash or make or other things. So let's talk about Fastlane. So Fastlane is a tool set of many different tools. They're all Ruby gems, and they basically work together to build whatever process you want. And it can basically do anything you would want to do: build, test, distribute, message on Slack, all kinds of stuff. We'll look at some of those more specific tools. It's built by this guy named Felix Krause, who is a total badass developer. He started this on his own, and it got acquired by the people at Fabric, or Crashlytics, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. So it's doing very well. It has a huge support from the community. Always people contributing and writing new tools. So here are just a couple of the Fastlane tools that we'll look at. Gem is just basically a wrapper around some of those other build tools we saw. Scan will execute your tests. Produce actually will talk to iTunes Connect and talk to the dev portal, create your apps, which is great because it's just one thing you have to set, another thing you have to set up by hand. Like I didn't even realize we could automate those things until I started using Fastlane. So that's really cool. Match is a gem that helps you manage all of your provisioning and certificates and everything like that. And I'll give you some more specifics on that later. But it helps you not have to worry about signing certificates and provisioning profiles and where they are and if they're expired, and make sure everyone on your team has them. Make sure no one on your team is messing them up for everyone else. So Match is great. We use it all the time at Linear Lincoln, and it saves all kinds of headaches. So Snapshot is another really cool one. Basically, this will help you generate screenshots for your app for the store. So, say your app supports 5 different devices and 3 different languages, that's a lot of screenshots you need to cover all those bases, all the combinations of device language combinations there. So I'll show you an example of that when we get into it, but that can save you a lot of time when you're trying to distribute an app. Normally it's like you put out a build to someone, a tester, and they go through and they find the right screens and they screenshot them, and then they have to send that to someone who then uploads them. Very arduous process that Snapshot makes a lot easier. At the time of writing, there were about 150 almost actions that are built into Fastlane. Cover everything from Git operations to building to notifying people, integrating with all kinds of services. Cool. So I've got an example project here for you, but one thing that's also worthy to note is Fastlane has some really great example projects that were actually contributed back to Fastlane by people like Wikipedia, made their Fastlane public, like how they use Fastlane, and all these other companies that have pretty robust build systems. They've made their Fastlane files public, so you can kind of see what they're doing and copy them. I'll obviously give you my example app, but there's also a ton of good stuff in the Fastlane examples. So this is a fast file, and this basically defines all of your processes that you're going to carry out and lets you piece together all of the various tools that Fastlane gives you to make magic happen. So you start up here, you define your platform, and then you have the option of doing something before any of these tasks below here. So we pretty much always need to do pod install before we test, before we build, before we do anything. So I threw the CocoaPods command up there at the top to make sure that always happens. And that just, all that does is run pod install. It's very basic, but so further down here, you see this thing right here, lane. You define lanes, which are actions you can call with Fastlane. So, I've defined a lane here called test. So from the command line, I can say Fastlane test, and it will carry out the actions in that lane right there. So right now I'm just using scan to run my unit tests and my UI tests. There's options you can pass in, all kinds of things you can configure, which scheme, what devices you want to run it on, if you want to run it on a real, simulators, real devices, all kinds of options. And those are all documented on each gem has its own set of options that you can pass to it. So that's a really basic one, just wanting to run my tests. And this would be great to do maybe post-commit, like if you want to set up Git hooks for your repository, you could say, hey, let's run the test lane after every time I commit, or even pre-commit, just to make sure that that's always happening for you. You can, that's a really basic form of automation to make it happen all the time. Moving further down, I've got a lane for sending a beta build. I'll comment this. You may or may not want to test again when you send the beta build. If it's already been tested, like on post commit, there's really no reason to run the test again. But we'll look at some of the commands I have in here. Clean build artifacts. I'm sure you all know what that does. It's going to blow away your derived data. Make sure you don't have any old code lingering around messing up your build. And here's the match command, which we talked about. What this is going to do, so what match does specifically is, I tell it, hey, I want an App Store profile. I'm going to be sending this to iTunes Connect. So, find me an App Store profile. It's going to read your bundle ID and say, okay, we need to find a profile and certificates that match these bundle ID and, what kind of profile you need. So what it does first is when you first set up match, you give it a Git repository, an empty one. And it will cache all of your profiles, certificates, everything you need for signing in this repository. Now, when I say match right here, it'll go look for those profiles and certificates in the repository. If it doesn't find them there, it'll actually go create them in the developer portal and then cache them in the repository. So basically, you have a place where you can get all of your signing credentials. Hopefully they're cached in the repository, so you don't even have to touch the dev portal. This is really good because, maybe on your build server, you don't want to have to give it all the credentials for every iTunes account that you have. It'll just always pull it from this repository where they're cached. So that kind of simplifies, it allows everyone to share these certificates and profiles. You're not recreating them all the time. If the profile in the repository is expired, it'll automatically just create a new one for you, bring it in. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to know that it was expired and do something. So it solves a lot of headaches as far as signing goes. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. So that's to make sure it gets signed correctly. We're going to increment the build number. This is a built-in Fastlane tool action. I think uses the Apple versioning tool. If you've ever used that before, AGV tool, it just bumps your build number by 1, or I think you can pass it an explicit one if you want to be more specific. So we're going to increment the build number, then we're going to actually read the build number back out so we know what the new version is. So this action, get build number, I tell it what project I want to look at, and it just reads me back out the build number. Now, having to do this in Bash would have been like at least 5 lines, and it wouldn't have worked the first 12 times you tried it, and this is just so much easier. So it really just removes a lot of the complexity of making this stuff happen and letting you focus on what you're trying to do, not like how to get it done, how to implement it. So, and then let's see, figure out where we want to stick the build. You'll see this action in a couple places, is CI. That basically just detects, like, is the script running on a build server or is it running just locally on my machine? Because you may want slightly different things, depending on which environment you're in. So from there, we actually build the app, tell it what workspace, what scheme. We tell it where we want the IPA to be spit out. And there's probably 10 other options you can pass into here. It's kind of ridiculous how much you can do with it. Now, pilot is just one word that will send your app, your newly created app, up to iTunes Connect. How it does all that, I don't know. There's lots of output and craziness going on while it's doing that, but it does work. It gets your apps up there to test flight. We'll let you automatically distribute them to whoever has access to it. That's a great one right there. And then wrapping up the beta Fastlane here, we just commit the new version, and this is why we read out the build number, is so we could commit it with the actual build number and say, hey, this was build number 5. Commits that, and then we tag it with the build number as well, and then we push it to the Git remote. Now, something you'll notice here is this little tag on the end here, CI skip. That basically tells, if you're running on a build server that responds to new commits and makes builds, well, if you push this new version number commit, it's going to see that as a code change and going to be like, oh, we need to build it again. And I have gotten myself in an infinite loop of building, doing that before. And so this might be specific to Jenkins. We use Jenkins as our build server, but this lets it know, like, hey, this commit didn't really change anything. We don't need to run a new build. So yeah, very important little thing to have in your commit there for the build number. And then we'll just wrap it up here. I have a lane to take screenshots of the app like we talked about. I give it basic information of how to run the app. And Snapshot is really cool. I'll show you how to set it up so you can get exactly the screenshots you want, without having to tap through the app and do it every time. And that just generates some PNGs in the folder that it's in, and there's another command that will actually upload those to iTunes, which will save you so much time because we all know how long that takes. And then kind of like the before all, you have an after all, which this will always get executed if it's successful. And then you have another one that's for handling errors. So, similar to how, we want to notify people right away, builds are ready. So, hey, if it's successful, we're going to post a hip chat. If I'm just running it locally, I'll just do a little OSX notification so that I know, but we're not like spamming the hip chat room with a local build or something. Same with if there's an error, we'll send it to hip chat and say, hey, your build failed and you need to go fix it. Actually, in the real build script we have running right now, it even will read out the last commit, figure out who did it, it posts in hip chat and was like, this person broke it, and there's like a big explosion. So public shaming is always a good motivator to help people fix their code. So that's essentially all I've got in my Fastlane right here, but it is crazy how much time it'll save you. And let's actually run it here. Exit full screen. So let me get into the space here. Okay, so let's just start with the test. So it's got some nice looking output. Here, let me see if I can make this any bigger. Yes, I can. So you can tell right now it's running that CocoaPods command that was in the before all, so make sure we got all of our dependencies there. Obviously that can take some time. Let's see. Can take a very long time. But they also have support for Carthage if you're using Carthage. I'm sure there will be a Swift package manager at some point. Oh, and we're moving on to the actual test here. You can see it gives you some informative output. You can see it's running my test here in the background. And it will, all the tests succeeded, great, awesome. I didn't see a notification come up. I might have Do Not Disturb turned on, which would be smart. But that's running a basic Fastlane, gives you all kinds of informative output. I'll tell you how long it spent in each action there. CocoaPods took a very long time. So that's your basic test lane. Now let's actually build it and send it to the store. Beta. Sorry, I know that's very far down there. And I think this will run the tests again just to be safe. And this obviously takes a minute. Like when the build gets up to iTunes, it's another like 5 minutes or so before it actually shows up, as I'm sure you are aware. So there is some delay there, but it does still notify you whenever it does actually show up, which is nice. So, yep, CocoaPods. And we're testing again. And eventually we'll get to the build. Here we're running match, so you can see it's gonna check out. Do we have the right profiles and certificates? Maybe not. We're gonna go check them out. Oh, that's my password. Don't know why I store that. And yeah, so that brings up a good point. I had to type in my password. It should pull all of your credentials from your keychain. So like your Apple ID password, basically anything you need to do dev portal stuff, iTunes Connect. It'll always look for it in your keychain. If it doesn't find it there, it will look in environment variables. So here we go again. So you can set Fastlane password as an environment variable, and it'll always use that. I should have done this before. Okay, we're building. We're doing something. What are we doing? Okay, it's uploading to iTunes Connect now. So that's great because if you're managing a build server, you don't want to always have to worry about like, oh, does that machine have this password in the keychain? Probably not. So what you can do is just set it in your build script as an environment variable, so you can inject different accounts, wherever you want. Okay, so now it's been uploaded. Now it's going to sit here and wait until it actually shows up. I guess it's like polling iTunes to see when it shows up, and it can be anywhere from 1 minute to like 10 minutes, and it'll just keep printing every 30 seconds that it's like waiting on it. But obviously, TestFlight is just one option. They have support for all of the various distribution services you've heard of and some you haven't heard of. There's a bunch of random ones out there apparently, but Hockey App, Crashlytics, pretty much all of them. I have no idea how long this will take, so I may just abort here in a minute.
So what happens if you abort?
If I aborted right now, it would probably still be there because I think it's just processing and waiting for it to happen. if you abort anywhere in the middle, it'll clean up whatever it was doing, but you're kind of just back to the top, whatever you're doing. And yeah, and then usually whenever it finishes, you'll get the email at the same time that's like, hey, your build is finished processing, which is kind of cool. Okay, there we go. Finish processing the new build, and it takes another second or two to wrap up everything here. It's not very exciting if you're watching it, but if it's happening in the background where you're still working, and then 10 minutes later you're like, oh, here's my build. It's pretty awesome. You're like, man, I didn't have to try at all to make that happen. It's a very cool feeling. Any minute now on that. There we go. Apparently they want you to tweet the iOS processing time. I don't know anyone who does that, or anyone who has ever done that.
Have that as a substep, like auto tweet.
Yeah, it should be. It should be. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a Twitter Fastlane gem. For sure, that seems like it would totally happen. And then here's the summary. We'll give you the breakdown of what all happened and how long it took. Pretty awesome. That's very cool. Like, if you're writing a bash script, who knows? Like, who knows why it took so long? It just hung on this one command forever and didn't go anywhere. And like, I don't know. This gives you some actual insight into what's taking long. Maybe if you're running the tests on like 4 schemes, like maybe that's taking too much time. We don't need to do that. Like, let's trim that back. So that's really cool. And so the other Fastlane that I had to show you is for doing the screenshots for uploading to the store. But I want to show you how that's done because it's pretty cool. They actually leverage the new UI testing. So the first thing you do is you record a UI test of like, get into the app to the place where we want to take a screenshot. Open the menu, tap in, go to this detail view, and pause right there. We want to take a screenshot right here. So what you do is, as Xcode writes out the steps to carry out the UI test, like basically if you haven't done UI tests before, you put your cursor right here, you say record. Down here at the bottom, it'll launch the app and you can tap through. It'll record all your steps in this test method right here. And then what you can do is you import this snapshot helper thing over here. Let me get this bigger. Thought there was a way I could just, oh, no.
You had to write preferences and fonts.
Of course. Presentation large. Boom. So big. Wow. So basically, in those steps of carrying out the UI test, you just put in this function call right here, snapshot, and you give it a name of like the screen it's on, or just a label for you to know what that is. And it will, I don't know how it does it, captures the whole window, prints it out to a JPEG or a PNG, and then even at the end of it, it'll make a little HTML file and open it in your browser and be like, here's all your screenshots, which is pretty cool. So this one will take less time. Let's just run it. Fastlane, what did I call that one? Screens? Fastlane screens. Got to do the whole pods thing again. Maybe I don't need to do that every time because it takes so long. Yeah, pod install. Any questions so far? Curiosities?
How long did it take you to write the Fastlane file?
Probably 4 or 5 hours to get it what I wanted. When you initialize Fastlane, they give you a really good stock one that has a lot of that in there. I played around with it for a long time and figured out, what was good. Password. I don't know why it's not pulling from a keychain. It may not be in there. It should be strange, but it's great. And like I said, so many example projects that will give you amazing stuff right out of the box. And it's compiling. Let's bring this up here. This is my to-do application, little toy app. And it's still going. Oh, it's actually running them for each different device right now. That's why it takes a minute. So it's on the iPhone 5 right now. It'll keep going. Don't think I had that many in there. 4S. So that's pretty awesome. I don't know how much time you guys spend getting screenshots, but if you've got a big app and a lot of... Oh, okay, here we go. So it finished now, and now it presents me this little file and is like, hey, here's all your screenshots, which mine are very boring. But you can see how that would be very exciting if every time you push up commits, it gets new screenshots. Like, that's amazing. That's so amazing.
Can you push that file up to like the FTP server or something somewhere and send the link to QA or
Yeah,
design or
absolutely. That's actually a great idea. I hadn't thought about using it for design QA. Like, hey, make sure my app looks right. Here's the latest screenshots of our code at the current state. I think that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, they've got tools where you can dump it in S3 and send a link to someone. All of that's very easy with Fastlane. So that's pretty much what I've got as far as Fastlane goes. Again, that was pretty basic, but lots of good example apps, lots of great stuff you can do. People use Fastlane for things other than iOS now too, like they use Fastlane to build Fastlane. They use Fastlane to run tests on other things, and so. Yes, they are working on it, and they have one tool out. I think it's called Supply, and it will let you edit your store metadata and I think upload apps. Yeah, there's another gem similar to that called Deliver for iOS, and you write out all your metadata in these files. It gives you these files. It's like, hey, here's, this is your app description file. This is your keywords file. And you just fill those out, and they're committed with the repository, and they get sent up. You can even submit for review from Fastlane. That seems a little ambitious. I think you should maybe pump the brakes and not be submitting for review in an automated process. But yeah, yes, there's Android support well on the way, from what it seems like. So.
All this stuff can be run locally, but obviously the server component is kind of the big time saver. Could you talk a little bit about y'all's setup?
Absolutely. That's actually where I'm going next. All right, let's get back in here.
Sorry, jump ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. You transitioned me right in. So, all right. So those are your scripts. Those are what actually do the heavy lifting of making stuff happen. Now, the build server is responsible for executing these scripts, doing it at the right time. And so what is a build server? It's basically just a server app that you can hook up to listen to your Git hooks, or you can just go in and click a button and say build now. They usually present some kind of web interface that you can access. Like I said, we're using Jenkins at Lunar Lincoln, but there's other ones. There's Travis. You can use Xcode Server. I've never used it, and I've tried using it, and it was very not user-friendly, and I gave up. Anyone ever used Xcode Server? Yeah? What was your experience like with it?
I liked it.
Yeah?
It was fun. The biggest issue I had with it was just not playing well with the network somehow.
That's what, yeah, I had problems just getting it to recognize,
You have to have the perfect network set up.
Right.
But if it does, everybody works great.
Yeah. And most build servers, like Jenkins, it can be self-hosted. Like, you can host it on a little Mac Mini in your office. You can also have them hosted on, AWS or wherever. If you have it hosted on some cloud service, you can scale it up, and because it can do multiple jobs at one time, but like for example, if you're running UI tests, there's only one simulator, so you can't run multiple UI tests at one time. So you either have to pipeline those jobs and make them happen in series, or you can scale up your Jenkins and have multiple slave machines that are doing jobs on their own. So probably someone like Facebook has many Jenkins instances all running together, all doing various stuff. So what a job on a build server typically looks like is you specify a repository. You're like, hey, this is the code we're going to be building. And at the start of the job, it'll always clone. It'll like wipe away everything it has, reclone the fresh copy of the code, and then it'll run whatever scripts you have in the job. And then it'll cache any new files that come out of the build, your IPAs, your DSIM, your screenshots, whatever that might be. And it's usually triggered by Git webhooks. Like, you go into GitHub or Bitbucket and you say, hey, post to this URL when you receive a new push or when you merge a pull request. And that's what triggers Jenkins to make a new build and run those scripts. You can always go in and click build now, like click a button that makes a new build on demand, but if you can hook into your latest code, I don't see any reason why you would ever do that. It should always be available. It's always there waiting for you. Your latest push code is sitting there in build form. And basically the job will fail if any of the commands it's running fails. So, if you're running tests with xcode build, if any of the tests fail, that's going to return a 1 or some non-zero exit code, and that tells Jenkins like, hey, something didn't work, and it'll abort the job and report those errors to you. So a lot of useful stuff there. Obviously, there's some drawbacks. There's a fair amount of complexity in managing all of this, making sure that your Jenkins has the right credentials, has all the necessary tools installed. You've got to install Fastlane and all these various tools on your build machine. And luckily we have Match to help us out with provisioning, and you can specify passwords in the environment variables, so that makes that a little easier. If you have usually it's like you have the template project with your build scripts, and it's like, we know this template project works, it needs to be in this format to work, and you basically base all your new projects off that template project so that they continue to work in your build server. But as oftentimes is the case, you're inheriting a code base, you have some old code base that's not been touched in a while. If you want to get it to run on the build server, you've got to work out the kinks of, oh, my info plist was named wrong and it needs to be named this, or I had an extra directory between my project file and this thing. There's all kinds of little things that can get off in a project and make it not work. Like you have to mark your schemes as shared so that they can be run from an external, from a build server, basically. All kinds of little things that'll catch you off guard, and that'll eat up some time just trying to get started on that project again. And it ultimately does pay off if you're going to be making more than a handful of builds. A couple hours getting it set up, I think, does pay off over time, because you push your code and then 5-10 minutes later, a build pops up and it's there. There's always the most recent build sitting there waiting for you. No one's ever interrupting you to make a build. Hopefully no one's bothering you because the provisioning isn't right and they can't install it. Everyone knows where to look for builds, and it's always the latest code that's been tested, signed off on. But if you're only making one build, probably not going to pay off for you. But so I wanted to show you guys Jenkins and what a Jenkins plan looks like. Let's see here. Fastlane. And has trouble getting it to work today. If you can't tell, these are all failed jobs here, but we're in shape now. It was not wanting to commit and push. So we're actually just going to run a test instead of the beta. But so you can see here, like, I specified some environment variables. Let's scroll up some. Here I give it the repository. This tells it what to clone, what branch to check out, etc. Enable CI skip. That was the thing we talked about to make sure it doesn't build in a loop and keep committing and building over and over again. I'm sure Travis and other CI systems have an equivalent. And then so here's our actual script. This is what the job is, as far as like, this is what's going to be executed when the job gets run. There's not very much here because all the work is in our Fastlane file, which is great. Because scripts here, not under version control, not able to code review. Like if you're writing all your scripts out here in the Jenkins plan, very hard to manage, very hard to make updates and have it apply to all of your jobs. Like at Lunar Lincoln, we have scripts that are in a repository, and this basically just clones a repository and runs some of the scripts. Like you don't want all of your code written out in here. Very hard to manage. So you can see I'm specifying a few variables before we get started. I give it the HipChat token. I tell it what channel of HipChat, what API version. Match passphrase. Match actually encrypts profiles and certs when they go in the repository. So you have just a little passphrase that's your keyword to encrypt and unencrypt it, just making it a little bit more secure. Yeah. And sorry, this is commented out. We can get rid of this. And then you can see here, all I'm running is Fastlane test, and that'll run the tests, and it'll generate my output, my test results. So let's save that, and let's actually commit and push something, and we will see it work. Let's just add some white space. And here we are. Oh, there are those screenshots. Should probably ignore those. Let's just commit the fast file. Alright, so we're going to commit and push, and then we will see once that completes. Bitbucket, you never know. Alright, so that's committed, that's pushed. Now, let's refresh this page. Second. And then it takes a minute. Like I said, Bitbucket sometimes has trouble with webhooks. Is it gonna do it? I don't know.
Enable auto refresh.
Where's that?
Top right.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that would probably do it. But I don't know. Not wanting to trigger the build. All right. Well, I'll just do one by hand so that we can see it. Like I said, lots of complexity in managing these things working together. There's always going to be something that can go wrong. But like I said, you can come in here and just click Build Now. And, oh, that really does auto-refresh. And what's cool is you can click into this job as it's working. You can see the console output of every, all the scripts it's running. And it'll report any errors. Yeah, and so Jenkins has all kinds of plugins available. Yeah, there it goes, crashing for some reason. Oh man, the get URL returned 500. Unexpected. That may explain why it's not working. Okay, well that was a bad example, but this kind of thing happens. Expect to deal with this kind of thing because this does happen. You will spend time fixing problems just to get your build out, which can be frustrating, but the goal is that the more you do it, kind of the more it gets smoothed out, the less you stop, or the the less you're messing with it, and the more kind of stable it can become. I was kind of messing with this up until the last second here, so it bit me. But yeah. So that's a brief tutorial on Jenkins. There's a lot you can do with it. You can use Jenkins for any kind of builds. Android, it'll run Gradle scripts. It'll run Ruby scripts. It'll, it'll do all kinds of things. And it has lots of plugins to help you manage, like, let's see, configure. This right here is the Git plugin. Helps me tell it what to do as far as checking out the right repo and because I could just write a script that does that, right? I could just say git clone this thing, and that would be all well and good, but I'd rather have someone else do that for me, give me an interface and some options to work with. So lots of plugins. There's an Xcode plugin. Make sure you have the right Xcode installed to run, tests and build and all that. Make sure you've got the command line tools. So a lot of stuff there, as well as Fastlane to help you get the job done. Okay, yeah. Internal server error, GitHub, thanks. So GitHub's having problems. That's why it didn't work. So obviously that's kind of a barrier. I'm relying on GitHub to make this build go out, as opposed to me just building it on my computer and giving it to someone. So you are kind of, tying yourself into these things, and if one of them goes down, you're like, what do I do? I guess I just go back to building on my machine. So, but this doesn't. I haven't seen that happen before. That's a new one, but definitely can happen at any time. So, any questions about Jenkins or build servers or anything?
Do you guys have any cool lines built? Because that seems to be like one of the big
Yeah.
areas you can have. If you're using Git flow,
Right.
you can have lanes for beta testers. You can have lanes for release.
Yes.
What kind of stuff do you guys use?
We actually, it's funny, we built a lot of our CI stuff before we knew about Fastlane, unfortunately. It was just gaining popularity over the last year, and we already had a fair number of scripts working. So a lot of our stuff right now is Bash, but we really would like to move to more Fastlane. I thought I'd cover Fastlane because that's what you're probably going to want to use. I would not recommend doing it all in Bash or Make or something similar. But look at the example apps. Lots of really good ones out there. I think my favorite thing about our build, the process that we do have, is if the test fails or if the build fails, publicly shame that person in HipChat and make sure that they fix it with a cool little animation of a rocket blowing up. That's cool. Everyone, it's great because everyone's aware, everyone's aware of what's going on, and so there's no I'm here struggling on my own and no one knows. If your build fails, I'm gonna know. I'm gonna ask you hey, why did this fail, or what can I do to help you fix that? Is it a Jenkins problem? Is it your build? It's just great for general awareness. Hey, a new build just popped out. They just finished that feature. I'm gonna start testing it right now, instead of waiting for the communication to come through the pipeline and all that. So that's what I think is really cool about it, total awareness, total immediacy of anything that can be automated. So I think it's great. It's really exciting for me, and I know Wiley is excited about it too. You can see it on his face. He's so excited. But it's just so cool to not have to make builds for anyone. They're always just there. There's no excuse why, builds are always available. They're always there. So that's what I got.